sports season. We're joined now by Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City. Mike, good morning to you.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Doing well, and certainly the hot-button issue has been high school football, and it's strange to say that in June, of course, especially coming after really an exciting spring sports season, baseball, softball, lacrosse. But let's face it, high school football is king in this area. And big news this week, the merging of the West Jersey Football League and the Cape Atlantic League. We just talked to Mike Gatley at the top of the hour. But, what changed? It was so really forcefully shot down a year ago, but really it went totally in the opposite direction this time around.
There's one thing that changed in the story I did in the Press of Atlantic City. Bud Cowell, the president of the West Jersey Football League, put it best. There is this vote in December that would separate the public and non-public schools in New Jersey, force them into separate leagues. And a lot of the non-public schools in the West Jersey Football League didn't want to see that happen. A lot of the West Jersey Football League public schools didn't want to see it happen. I think Bud Cowell talked about, they didn't want South Jersey kids going up to Bergen County on a routine basis to play football games. So I think the threat of the so-called high school football Armageddon by separating the public and non-public schools caused people to think in a different manner than they've done before. And like you said, they almost reversed their vote from, 2 years ago. It was, 50-something to the teams against the CAL joining, and this time it was 55-11, pro the CAL joining.
So 11 people did vote against it, 11 schools vote against it, and of course we're not going to call anyone out, but what are still some of the hang-ups? I mean, overwhelming majority feeling like this is a good move, so it will happen, of course it was passed, but what are still some of the hang-ups? Is it scheduling, traditions, a little bit more travel? I mean, there have to be some cons to this situation too.
Well, I think the 11 schools that voted against it, and obviously the league did not release how each school voted, so you don't know, but I can kind of speculate here. I would say the 11 that voted against the CAL joining did not want the CAL's 3 non-public schools, St. Augustine Prep, Holy Spirit, or St. Joe, to come in. There's still a hardcore group of people that probably feel that they don't want to those non-publics to come in. They don't want to play them. They feel that some of those schools might draw from their area. St. Augustine's gets a lot of kids from, over in Gloucester County, Burlington County now. So there's a lot of schools over there that might not want, teams like that in their league. But obviously the overwhelming majority of schools in that league felt, the CAL would be a good addition and help them keep their non-public schools, give their non-public schools a full schedule.
Scheduling-wise, I mean, people look at this and think, wow, my favorite team, my son's team is going to play a totally different group of games, different teams this season. That's not necessarily the case, though. I understand that in this merger, I mean, if the natural rivalries make sense, if teams that are the same school size have been playing each other in the Cal, they could continue to do so in the West Jersey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're going to see, the core of your team's games remain the same. So I'm positive Atlantic City is still going to play Egg Harbor Township. They're still going to play, they'll probably still play Millville. They'll probably, still play Vineland. What you're going to see is schools of enrollment size stay together. The problem with the Cape Atlantic League was the Cape Atlantic League is a league based on geography and not enrollment size. And it only had the 17 football schools, so it had 4 Group 5 schools. So those Group 5 schools couldn't play, you got to play 9 football games. They couldn't play 5 other Group 5 schools. That's why, they would sometimes have to play a Group 2 school or something like that. The Cape Atlantic League, the Group 2 schools, Buena Regional, Cedar Creek, I think they're still going to play each other, the Group 2s. But I think what it opens up is an opportunity, you're going to see some good crossover games. So Atlantic City will play the Group 5 and Group 4 schools from Atlantic County in their division, and then they'll cross over. Maybe they'll play a Cherry Hill East or a Washington Township or a Cherokee. I think it'll lead to some interesting matchups, and I think it's a big boost for kind of some of the Group 2 programs that have been struggling a little bit, your Lower Cape Mays, your Pleasantvilles. I think they're going to be able to, week in and week out, play a team just like themselves that they're able to go out there and compete against. And plus, I think you could see the renewal of some great games. I mean, Wildwood is in the WJFL. You know, why not a Wildwood Lower Cape May crossover game or a Wildwood Middle Township? You know, Bridgeton and Cumberland used to play every Thanksgiving before Cumberland left for the Tri-County Conference in the WJFL. Why not renew that rivalry out there? And, of course, the big one, you know, maybe we get Hamilton and St. Joe back in 2016.
I know a lot of people in the town of Hamilton rooting for that. Of course, that rivalry sorely missed last year. But, you know, going off of that, St. Joe, in losing Hamilton, was able to go out and schedule some quote-unquote regional powerhouses. We saw them go out to Ohio. You know, with this new alignment here, the scheduling of that kind of a game, would that be impossible under this?
Well, you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, there's a lot of talk. You know, pieces are kind of falling in place all over the state, and this was one of those pieces because it seems like everybody wants to avoid that December vote to separate the public and non-public schools. So you had an opportunity up north where 3 or 4 conferences are kind of following the West Jersey Football League model, and they're coming together to form a 114-team league. And part of the plan of that league is to have some South Jersey non-public schools like Holy Spirit, like St. Augustine, like St. Joe go up and play a North Jersey non-public power like a Don Bosco or a Bergen Catholic, you know, once during the season. So you don't know exactly how the divisions are going to break down or how the schedules are going to break down. You know, all that will be done in the fall of next year. But, you know, I've got a feeling that there's going to be some opportunities for some of these teams that want to play high-profile games to go out and play some high-profile games.
Again, really, I think across the board, most people view this as a win. Of course, you're going to have some traditionalists and some people, you know, against it. And one of the reasons maybe against it, or the reasons people were throwing out this week, is playoff matchups. In the past, of course, you would most likely see a team that you wouldn't have faced during the regular season. Of course, under this new merger, you're playing more teams your own size during the regular season. Then, of course, in the playoffs, you play a team your own size. What's your take on that, Mike? Of course, the likelihood of matching up against a team in the playoffs much higher with this merger in terms of playing that team in the playoffs that you already played in the regular season.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I still think if you see a common opponent, you might see one. You know, it might happen once, and that's happened in the Cape Atlantic League. You know, even with the Cape Atlantic League staying by itself, I remember a couple of years ago, Atlantic City played Millville the last week of the cutoff, and then the next Friday night they played in the playoffs. Same thing, Atlantic City and Outagami, you know, almost played back-to-back a couple of years ago. That's going to happen. You know, I think there's enough variety. There's 16, 17 teams in each group. 8 make the playoffs. So I think, you know, you're going to have enough variety there. And if you have a rematch, you have a rematch. I mean, you know, one of my things is, you know, the NFL has rematches and playoffs, and they seem to be doing pretty well. You know, I think high school football can survive it. You know, I think the merger was a move that had to happen. I mean, the Cape Atlantic League just could not provide competitive schedules for all its programs with the 17 schools of a diverse nature that they had. You know, they've got Group 2 schools, Group 5, non-publics. There's no other league in the state that had the Cape Atlantic League scheduling problems, and going to the West Jersey Football League solves that. And I think the Cape teams they'll still retain their identity, and they'll still retain local rivalries. You know, I think it was a positive move.
It seems like we've been talking Cape Atlantic League football forever. I know you've been covering it for a long time. How strange will it be to not use those words in a story in a couple years?
Yeah, it will be strange. You know, instead of the Cape Atlantic League American Conference, it might be, you know, the American Conference of the West Jersey Football League. So it will be strange, and it definitely will be different. But, you know, time kind of marches on, and especially in football. You mean, you look to college and conferences that once existed don't exist anymore, and rivalries that were big when I was growing up. You know, those teams don't even play anymore. So time goes on. And, you know, it'll be an adjustment definitely to write those words like National Division of the West Jersey Football League and stuff. It'll be different, but in the end, I think it's a change that kind of had to come to Cape Atlantic League football.
Checking in with Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City here on the South Jersey Sports Report, 97.3 ESPN FM. Of course, that was the big story this week, the merger between the West Jersey and the Cape Atlantic League. But, Mike, we're also coming off of state baseball and softball championships a week ago, so I want to get your final take on some of the things that happened during the spring season. And what jumps out to me, of course, Holy Spirit. I mean, it seemed like this was Mainland a year ago, and Mainland having another good run this year, but really coming out of nowhere, sub-500 regular season, and the Spartans march all the way to the state non-public B championship. I mean, a remarkable run, and really, who could have seen it coming?
No one, basically. You know that Holy Spirit coming in. I remember talking to you about them. You know, they got off to that 1-7 start, and I saw them twice early in the season. And it seems like every time I went to see them play, they were facing the other team's ace pitcher. I saw them lose to Mike Pistoria in St. Augustine Prep. I saw them lose to Matt Ardente and Amzagami. And in those games, it was one inning, one play, one booted ground ball that kind of did them in. They got a little better as the season went along. They beat Ocean City, took St. Augustine to extra innings. And then when they got in non-public B against teams, that might have had better records but not better talent, Holy Spirit able to, get on a little hot streak. And a big part of that is pitching. And they went to 3 sophomores, Bobby Spicer, Jules Masawa, and Billy Crow. And those 3 kids pitched lights out. Same as Mainland did last year on their run of the state Group 3 championship. And, Holy Spirit able to win its first state title since 1982, basically due to that pitching and timely hitting.
Spirit standing alone as the only state champion, I believe, out of the South. I mean, obviously a number of teams, baseball and softball, with great runs, sectional championships. So we'll stay on the baseball side. And sort of that magical run comes to an end for both Buna and Mainland. Both teams winning a state championship a year ago. Sectional titles this year. I mean, it's so hard to repeat, Mike, as state champs, but really still a lot accomplished by those two squads. Back-to-back sectional crowns, and they're both teams graduating a number of seniors, so they're done at the high school level. But, man, what a run it was for the Chiefs and the Mustangs.
Oh, tremendous season by both of them. I mean, let's not get spoiled here. I mean, last year, Mainland Regional and Buna Regional were the first Cape Atlantic League public school teams to win state titles since the state tournament began in 1971. So that shows you how tough it is to do it. In past years when Cape Atlantic League public school teams won South Jersey titles, we threw parades down Main Street here. It was that rare of an occurrence. So the fact that Buna and Mainland were able to go out there and repeat they end up losing state semifinal games. The fact that they were able to repeat is just a tremendous achievement by both teams and caps a tremendous 2-year run, especially for Mainland, who you talked about it with Holy Spirit coming from nowhere. Mainland at one point last season was 7-11. They win 9 out of their last 10 last year. So they finished last season 9-1. They go 23-6 this season. That's 32-7 with 2 South Jersey titles, 1 state title, Cape Atlantic League American Conference Championship. That's just a tremendous year and a half of baseball by Billy Kern's crew down there at Mainland. And
you look at the softball side of things, and obviously great seasons from a number of teams near the top. Sort of frustrating ends that these teams have seen before. St. Joe, again, another heartbreaking loss in the state championship game, but an outstanding run. The Buna Chiefs, another sectional crown. They continue to run into the same team in the state semifinal round, again, falling there. But, again, you say we get a little bit spoiled with some state championships, but it's so hard to reach the top of that mountain, and still outstanding runs by both the Wildcats and the Chiefs on the softball side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and 2 heartbreaking defeats. I mean, I think Buna has lost to Robbinsville, who's one of the best teams in the state, 3 or 4 years in a row. This time they go extra innings and lose 1-0. And then St. Joe runs into Immaculate Conception Lodi again in the state final, and they lose just a walk-off game. I've got to give a lot of credit here to St. Joe catcher Carly Testa. She had a tremendous career with, I think she had more than 200 career hits. She batted something like .694 this season. But what really kind of impressed me most about her was, after St. Joe lost that game, they lost in the bottom of the 7th inning, 2-1, walk-off win for Immaculate Conception. I mean, Carly Testa really stood up. There's a group of reporters there wanting to talk to her. She's a little teary-eyed. It's a tough emotional loss, but, she came right over, talked to reporters, answered questions, did a great job. This is less than 5 minutes after a crushing state final loss. You see something like that, and you see an athlete do that. That really says a lot about her character. It says a lot about the school. Says a lot about the program that Coach Katie Dean runs. And when you see her do something there that, believe me, a lot of professional athletes wouldn't do. That's what kind of makes covering high school sports great.
That's a great point, and so much of the general public, that stuff goes unnoticed. They don't really have to realize how tough it can be as a reporter, as a media member, to sort of get that story, especially at the high school level. But you're right. I mean, kudos to her, kudos to that team for standing up and answering questions, and nothing to be ashamed about. They had an absolutely great run. Mike, we'll get you out of here with one last question. We talked, obviously, football, baseball, softball. Any other takeaways, maybe from track and field, lacrosse, golf, any of the other sports? Some storylines that maybe jumped out to you this spring, and some things that made this season a memorable one?
Well, I think if you look at track and field, you really get a look at some great CAL programs that kind of go unnoticed. I kind of did some stories this year about them. Oakcrest this year, 45-0 in dual meets. Or they continue their streak. They've now 45-0 in dual meets over the last 5 years. They win a South Jersey Group 3 championship. The Egg Harbor Township girls win their 5th straight Atlantic County championship. And the Buena Regional boys and girls track continue undefeated streaks in winning the national conference. I think, if you look at the overall, success of some of our track teams around here, kind of goes unnoticed. And then the other, a great golf season by David Hicks of Middle Township there. It seems like, there's always a Hicks down there in Middle Township playing golf. Really just a tremendous season all around by athletes. The Advanced Cape Atlantic League lacrosse teams getting better. Egg Harbor Township boys, Ocean City boys, Middle Township girls, Bridget Rusky. It seems each year, that people in that sport in the area just keep getting better and better. So, the spring season goes fast. There's a lot happening, but it was another tremendous year for Cape Atlantic League teams, and we're celebrating it all in the press this week with our All-Star selections leading up to our Athlete of the Year presentation next Sunday.
All right, a lot of great stuff in the press of Atlantic City. Of course, the golf feature today, and looks forward to the Athlete of the Year coming up in a few days. Mike McGarry from the Press of AC, always appreciate the time. Thanks for your insight all year long, from the fall to the winter to the spring, and we'll talk to you soon. Enjoy your summer.
All right, Mike, I enjoyed every minute of it. Thanks for having me on just about every Saturday. Really appreciate it.
You got it. Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City.